Hello and welcome to the second of our autumn webinars. It's Jeremy here at Blue Sky. Once again, we are delighted to see the number of pre-registrations that we've had for this autumn series of webinars. I think it's probably the highest that we've ever seen. Secondly, for those of you that battled through the audio gremlins in Mike's session from a couple of weeks ago, a re-recording of the session is imminent, and this will be added to the website in due course. We will remind you again at the end of the session, but if you haven't already done so, please sign up for our third and final session on the 4th of December. This will see us run through the remainder of the PAG report from Chapter 7, Offsetting. So as always, the aim for these sessions is to pick up on our observations and experiences since the original PAG report was released. And it will hopefully act as a refresher for some of you and be a good introduction for those of you that are new to PAG, be that PAG 1 or PAG 2. Before we start today's session, before I introduce our speaker Rob today, some quick housekeeping points. First of all, the presentation will last around 45 minutes. And that should provide some time for questions at the end. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, Mike and I will be in the background, so to speak. Please add them to the Q&A function, and we'll try and answer those as we go along. But if we see a particular question which we think could be of interest to the wider team, maybe we might interject with Rob at a point, or perhaps come back to that question at the end. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be added to our website, where you can find a wealth of information about pensions and divorce. And finally, we will be sending out the slides to all attendees in the next few days. We're confident that we've ironed out those audio gremlins and that this one will be crystal clear, but you'll all be the judge of that, I'm sure. Right, so without further ado, on to today's session, and a warm welcome to Rob. Just a bit of brief information on Rob. So Rob is an owner-director here at Blue Sky. He's been at Blue Sky, I think, for approaching 13 years, if not more. Rob is a chartered and a certified financial planner. He's a pensions on divorce expert, that's a POD, and he's also a resolution accredited specialist in this area. So without further ado, over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you all for joining us. As Jeremy said, this is the second of our autumn series of webinars. Mike's first session on pension basics is well worth a revisit once the re-recorded version arrives on the website. But let's dive into today's agenda if we can. So, we've got an introduction, we'll get this piece out of the way as quickly as possible because we want to get into the meat of the PAG. But obviously an introduction to Blue Sky and how we help divorcing clients, background onto PAG, and maybe there's a piece about the summary of what we've learned. Now, as far as the format of today is concerned, and maybe the story as to why we find ourselves at the webinar now, Look, Blue Sky moved office earlier on in the year, and I think that probably took a lot of our focus. The original plan was to do an autumn series where we would have majored on what the differences were between PAG 2 and PAG 1. However, with the office taking up a bit of time and a bit of reflection, we actually changed what we thought we were going to do and decided to actually just revisit PAG in its totality. We felt that probably the best way to do this was to actually break the report into two sections. So session 1 today, session 2 in a fortnight's time. Today we're going to go all the way up to chapter 6, and in 2 weeks' time we're going to start at chapter 7 and work our way towards the end. Now, we think this is a good point to break it because chapter 6 is the second biggest of all the chapters because it majors on pension sharing. Whereas chapter 7, and I should say, by the way, that the PAG report calls them parts, not chapters, but chapter 7 is all about offsetting, the biggest chapter of the lot. It's had a lot of work done on it since PAG 1. So we felt that we could do offsetting proper justice in the next session, and pension sharing can be picked up in this session. Okay. As far as Blue Sky, If you saw last time's presentation with Mike, this is going to look tremendously familiar and possibly a little bit boring. But yeah, Blue Sky, there's 15 of us here. I've got our fantastic team of administrators, technicians, we call them power planners, and then the financial planners as well. As Jeremy alluded to, we are chartered financial planners. We're not actuaries. And of course, we are pensions on divorce experts. That lovely acronym that was born by the original PAG report, a POD, sounds like toad. We've been producing these pension sharing reports pretty much since the moment that pension sharing came into being. After earmarking was the only thing you could do pre-2000. We've been writing reports since 2000. Solicitors and mediators have access to a resolution accredited specialist in terms of Blue Sky. The rogues gallery, so to speak. Here we can see that's we've got to get off this slide quickly, haven't we? There's me, Jeremy, Mike, and Jack. I've got the special little orange tick to be a specialist. The rest of the guys are all resolution members or associates, as we call them as well. Okay. This is another familiar slide if you've seen a few Blue Sky slides over the years, deliberately put in here. And I think it's relevant in this instance because PAG is referencing on multiple occasions the importance of having a good financial advisor that you tie up with, not necessarily literally become stuck to, but that you know that you have as a resource as and when you might need them. So this slide touches on what we think is the 4 stages, the initial stages, the scoping, maybe a bit of cash flow work, maybe a bit of help on Form E, maybe we're needed in mediation, through to the bargaining stage where maybe a pension sharing report comes into play. Maybe there's stress testing on cash flow models and potential settlements. Maybe there's shadow work, maybe there's more mediation. Anyway, you can see here with this slide, we've tried to highlight, look, at different points in the process, there's a good chance you might need someone, whether that's us or any one of the other experts who specialize in this field and have put a lot of work into specializing into this field. That's perhaps not so important. The key point is be aware of the different touch points when an expert would be of use to you and, of course, most importantly, your clients. Okay, moving on to PAG. So let's move on to PAG. To give it its proper name, as it says there, just in case you were looking for a publication called PAG, it doesn't exist. It is a guide to the treatment of pensions on divorce. Perhaps the first thing I'd like to do is wind us back in our time machine. How was it even born in the first place? Well, it came about when pretty much anybody involved in the divorce and particularly pension assets, a group of professionals came together and said, well, look, can we create some degree of greater understanding as to how these things, pensions that is, are to be dealt with, some kind of order to it. And so what we saw was we saw a group of professionals, including solicitors, barristers, judges, actuaries, financial advisors, all coming together, which I dare say was quite daunting. But fortunately, they had a fantastic person by the name of Hilary Woodward who helped to kind of chair the PAG, pull them all together, and the meaningful report of PAG 1 was the byproduct of that great piece of work. Overall, the aim, of course, here is to help legal practitioners, financial experts, judges, barristers, mediators, and of course, divorcing couples. Broadly speaking, the aim is to help people involved with pensions on divorce decide when input from a pensions on divorce expert might be required, to make sure that people are well informed, to draw attention to common pitfalls, to act as a good practice guide, to signpost readers to other sources, in other words, know when they've reached their limit and when to call someone in to help. And of course, it also covers off, well, who exactly could be a POD. I think in that particular instance, it's really referencing who has the credentials to write a pension sharing report. Blue Sky were contributors to the original PAG report, and I've got to tell you, we remain extremely keen advocates of all it stands for, not least because it's complementary to the thoughts and methodology that we've had in place in that last couple of decades of us producing pension sharing reports. As far as PAG 2 is concerned, it's important to understand that it is an evolution from PAG 1. It is not a revolution. The original PAG report acknowledged that there were some areas in the original report that would need to be revisited again in the future. So we can see, for example, if you've closely inspected the two different versions of PAG report, that PAG 2 has got bigger in some areas and developed them. And the most notable, we would say, is Chapter 7. As I said, that's what we're going to cover off in a fortnight's time, which is all about offsetting, where the grappling of the difficult beast that can be offsetting tries to come up with some extra clarity. I suppose the last point to say on PAG is that it has been reported that it is most unlikely that there will be a PAG 3. I suppose never say never, but the one thing that has happened is that Hilary Woodward has retired. Okay, we might be possibly guilty of picking some fantastic quotes out of the PAG report, and here's one. In some cases, it might be desirable to bring in at the outset a suitable qualified independent financial advisor, an IFA, and or a shadow expert. In other words, an expert that's appointed by one party to provide pensions advice, which is distinct from any single jointly instructed expert appointed by the court, to help the client identify what they're trying to achieve financially, to give advice as to whether a report is necessary, and if so, what questions to ask. They may also be able to advise on the contents of any report, on implementation, and a destination scheme where appropriate. So that's pretty powerful stuff. There's the place you can find it. I'm sure you believe me, it does exist in the PAG report, that statement. Perhaps a quick piece on a suitably qualified IFA and maybe what that means to us. For us, it does mean independent. That's I suppose the first extraction. For us, I think it also means that we're expecting to see someone that is chartered or certified. And when I say us, I'm saying is if you're a practitioner thinking I need to try and find myself someone who can help me with the dilemmas that I'm being posed with my client, then chartered or certified, I think, is a desirable aspect. To give you some context for those of you who aren't financial advisors and financial planners in the audience today, and I know there's a few of you, to be a client-facing financial advisor, you need to have passed what's called the diploma. The diploma in NVQ land is a level 4. Someone that has put the effort into becoming chartered or certified has managed to drag their NVQ number up to 6. In other words, they have themselves a degree and some serious commitment to their trade and their day job. So for us, that's an imperative. I'd go further. I'd say that if you are looking for help, you really want to see that the person you're seeking help from has at least become a member of Resolution, because naturally that should show some commitment towards helping divorcing clients and solicitors. You could also, if you're lucky enough, find yourself a Resolution accredited specialist. It's safe to say that these are gold dust. At the last conference last year in Birmingham, the feeling was it was just below 40 was the number of accredited specialists out there. So if you manage to find one, love them and cherish them and work with them would be my suggestion. Okay, moving on to PAG. My tip for the top in terms of how to get the most from the PAG report. So if you are the kind of person that is extremely time starved, then I would say just read the executive summary. It's 8 pages of gold dust and really shouldn't take more than a few minutes to do. If you have yourself a bit more time, then it would be my recommendation. You read the executive summary, you read part 1 or chapter 1 as I'm sometimes referring to it, and each one of the subsequent parts or chapters has a very nice summary section at the beginning of it. So if you read those points as per the second bullet point, my guess, that's about 45 minutes of your time. Want to know a lot more? Read the lot then. That will be 2 to 3 hours. And if you're struggling a little bit with insomnia or you're a technician, then read it all 177 pages, including the appendices for you to read. At the beginning, well, obviously, of PAG 2, we have ourselves a foreword. So I thought I'd just pop that one into the presentation so you can see it. We can see there that's from the chair of the Pensions Advisory Group, the PAG group. And it says, we are very well aware that an unwillingness to tackle pension issues has not gone away. This, of course, is a quote from PAG 2, not PAG 1. So it is still a problem. That's got to be said. Okay, so if I dive into the first of the parts, part 1, I keep referring to them as chapters. I mean the same thing. With part 1, part 1 frames up some of the current observations on how pensions are approached by legal professionals. It highlights some of the key problems around pensions on divorce, and it then goes on to make some excellent suggestions around how the matter of pensions on divorce should be tackled. And as I said in my quick slide a moment ago of how to get the most out of PAG report, my second drop-down option was, yes, read the executive summary, but do read the whole of part 1 as well, because it's a good framing chapter. On the slide here, we can see, as you see, that the part 1 is entitled Introduction and Overview of Key Recommendations. It says, there are a pile of statements in here, pension sharing professionals are still not comfortable with the issues that confront them. It moves on to say complexity, regulations, limited guidance from the high courts, together with inconsistency of guidance. Anecdotal perception that wives often concentrate on the present need, home and children. Any divorce experts that are financial planners and financial advisors sitting out here, that is a very common soundbite that we will come across, and I'm sure my solicitors friends out in the audience are also very strongly of the opinion that that's the case as well. The financial cost of making an uneducated guess about the pensions to avoid a pension sharing report and getting it wrong can be immense. It can turn, it can basically lead to a claim, is what the rest of that slide's moving on to say. A bit more on part 1. A comprehensive gathering of information regarding the parties' pensions assets is vital. Lawyers need to have firmly in mind the inherent limitations in the use of the cash equivalent transfer value, CE, and offsetting is more commonly used and not always with full and proper evaluation. The PAG report, should you not have clocked this already, it does clearly stipulate that the most predominant method of sharing is by the use of offsetting, not pension sharing. So that chapter, when we get to chapter 7 next time around, that's going to be nice and interesting. Lawyers advising on pensions on divorce cases need to be keenly aware of taxation issues. So good read, chapter 1. My guess, handful of minutes for you to whiz through that. It's really a framing chapter. Moving on to part 2. This provides a high-level guidance across the pension sharing process from start to finish, and I've picked out some of the key conclusions made in this report. It starts off when you're collecting your information, the use of Form P, that's the document where you'll put in, or your client will help you to fill in information on what the pension is and what the CE is. Getting that, yes. Forms BR 19 and 20 to gather information about the state pension. I must admit, from our perspective, if we're doing pension sharing reports, I think just the state pension forecast does the job on the majority of occasions. There are occasions where 19 and 20 are important, but the state pension forecast is generally sufficient for our needs. Assess whether the services of a suitably qualified financial advisor are necessary. Before agreeing the words of a pension sharing order, it will be prudent to take financial as well as legal advice. If a pension sharing order is to be made, agree who is to pay it. Ensure the pension claimant chooses a suitable destination scheme for their share. And as it says there, this may necessitate the need for financial advice. Indeed, an extraction straight from the PAG report goes on to say it may be necessary to bring in at the outset a suitably qualified IFA and or shadow expert. It's interesting. I'll just take a bit of a tangent there in terms of experts and perhaps blue sky. We saw from that slide I presented earlier on where it said all of the various touch points that we touch couples going through divorce. I think my observation from going to the conference in Birmingham last year is that blue sky doing pension sharing reports as well as those items is a relatively rare thing to expect from a POD. In fact, I think pretty much as far as I can work out, we've got the likes of Ian and Paul at Southdown Consultants in the Midlands who do everything like we do. But aside from that, most of the other experts have chosen not to write pension sharing reports, but they highlight, but that, you know, they work very proficiently in the other areas referenced in the earlier slide. They are adept at deciphering a pension sharing report. They are good at assisting on creation of a letter of instruction, stress testing potential settlements, and implementing an order. The crucial thing, and I've said it a few times now, is find one and work with them. Continuing with part two. Part two also references that a POD, a pension sharing report writer, will need to be able to self-certify their work when they've created such a thing. Now, deep in the appendices of PAG is the suggested wording for that particular matter. Letters of instruction. Use the template provided. Seek shadow expert advice if unsure. Asking unnecessary questions can incur costs. Once again, the PAG report in the appendices does have a suggested wording for a letter of instruction. We've got one on our website as well if you're stuck for where to start on the matter. As far as letters of instruction, however, are concerned, of course, we've been doing this for a long time, this creation of pension sharing reports. We've therefore seen hundreds upon hundreds over the last couple of decades. In recent times, I think we can probably doff our hats and say, look, do you know what? The majority are written quite well. We're very pleased to see less of the catch-all or sweetie shop letters of instruction. That is to say that I'll ask each one of the questions from the top row, the second row, and the third row, which merely just results in lots and lots of questions, lots and lots of confusion, and of course lots and lots of cost for the client who's having to pay for the numerous amount of questions that are in play. I'd also say that, you know, if you are coming across specific, we call them tricky schemes, things like the Armed Forces pension scheme, the police pension scheme, maybe you've isolated in your due diligence that there's a SIP or a SAS that includes a commercial property. You know, these are instant flags for, I need the help of an IFA to help frame the questions in the letter of instruction. There's no question for us. In a nutshell, try and keep the instruction focused, and remember that more questions equals more complexity, which equals more cost and potentially more to argue about. I'd go so far as to say that if you all found yourself a financial advisor who could assist with letters of instruction, from my capacity, and I might go so far as to say every other pension sharing report writing POD in existence, we'd be over the moon if all instructions came through crystal clear. Now, I know I'm exaggerating and in that hope, but you know, if in doubt, please ask, would be my overall abiding point there. Before I leave this slide, though, I just wanted to touch on that last point, and I think it was something that, in fact, I know it was something that came up in Mike's Basics webinar, the most recent webinar we did. As we get to that one, which was says, look, be careful not to stray into giving financial advice. To give some meat to that statement, you know, we were made aware quite recently of a situation where a solicitor had made a recommendation that a client surrendered a pension to release cash. And let's just dig into that scenario a bit deeper and why that can cause problems. So the first point is, well, if you release the cash from said pension, that does release 25% of it tax-free. But what it also does is relieve 75% of it subject to income tax. What it also does is it means that moving forward, that individual, it has restrictions applied to them in terms of how they rebuild their pension wealth post-divorce. There's maximum contribution levels that can be paid into things like their workplace pension. So what might have sounded like a good plan at the outset ultimately resulted in a regulated piece of financial advice occurring by a non-regulated advisor, which is obviously not so hot on professional indemnity insurance claims possibly in the future. Moving on to questions to ask in your letter of instruction. I'll just release all of the slide. What we've got at the top of this slide is that the key questions we'll always impress upon anybody that will ever listen to us on this matter is that your base question must always be to seek an equality of income calculation. The reason why that's so important is that other calculations derive from that base question. So if you're asking for offsetting, what are you actually offsetting against has got to be the question. Well, in order to do that, you needed the equality of income calculation in the first instance. So at the top there, we're saying that realistically, equality of income and offsetting, they're probably a staple in a well-written letter of instruction. We've said, and look, I know there's mitigating circumstances for some of these points, that perhaps the following statements might not be quite so helpful. Now, it's a sweeping statement because there are occasions when some of these could be helpful. Equality of capital, there's an example coming up in a couple of slides on why that might create potential issues. Equality of fair value, it's certainly a bit of a pet hate from a blue sky perspective. I could probably do a webinar on that one. Ring fencing, there's some slides coming up, and offsetting increments. For example, the dreaded, can I have offsetting figures in £10,000 intervals between 100 and 350,000? Really? Not particularly helpful. Do think about them, but as I say, the key piece on a letter of instruction, get a good quality base question out first that is around equality of income, probably an offset if that's relevant in your case, and dish out the rest of the tools on that slide if and when necessary. The benefits of a good letter of instruction. I'll leave the slide open for a few minutes on that, but we can see that it obviously helps to promote understanding. Hopefully, a good letter of instruction results in a good report that addresses the key issues, which helps you with your clients. Hopefully can help you with insights to specific arguments that one side might be making or the other side might be making, so it creates good discussion, not a whole load of new questions. Keep it concise, helps to keep your cost of the report, or ultimately your client's cost of the report, to a minimum, and implementation fees considered and minimized, accelerate settlement, and I'm sure there's some graphs that we've probably bored you with in the past around Kubler-Ross grief cycles and how if we can grease the wheel along the way, it can help with the emotional state of your clients, probably yours as well, actually. Moving on to part 3. Part 3 is titled The First Stage, Computation of Pension Assets and Methods of Division. What have we got on this slide? So let's wander our way through the slide. So obtain full, okay, so right, this is the, okay, so obtain full information on all pension entitlements disclosed to both parties. It's effectively a scripting of what questions one might want to ask from your perspectives as solicitors, as you're trying to gather the information to understand and assimilate, well, what exactly am I dealing with here? I think it's probably another tag back to Mike's presentation on pension basics will assist massively with understanding how to apply the pension basics knowledge to part 3. But effectively it's saying, look, obtain full information on all the pension entitlements and obviously share them with the other side. Next crib, are there any defined benefit schemes held by either party? Was there anything a bit weird? What we mean in this is, does one of them own a business that's got a business property that's owned by their pension plan, for example? The PAG report, and you can see in red, we've kind of semi-challenged it, says assessed whether the cash equivalent represents appropriate value. And you can see that we put a statement on this slide that says, we're not convinced you're going to know this. That's where you're going to need somebody to help you. Evaluate whether a POD is required. Now, that might have answered the previous question. Consider whether to divide the pensions based on equalisation of income or capital. We think this is an area you're going to need a bit of help on. Part 3 makes it blatantly clear, ignoring the pensions is not an option. Part 3 also covers, I'm sure, a challenge that many of you have come across over the years, which is that you think that a pension sharing report is required, but your client doesn't. That's a tough one. And I think there's been commentary in other areas about obtaining warranties and things like that. But sometimes it might help to simply say that I've got an accredited expert through resolution. They're a financial planner. Please, can you speak to them in the first instance? Because it might be that they are able to get the point and the connotations of not having a pension sharing report out in a slightly different way to the way that you might be bringing it out. So just keep flexible on that last point would be my thought process, really. Moving on to part 4. Part 4 is titled Needs versus Sharing Cases. Now, I apologize. I'm sure there's many in the audience here who are quite blatantly aware of what the difference is. So my apologies for going over old ground possibly. But the PAG, both PAG 1 and PAG 2, of course, both concurred and agreed that most cases that will come through your desks will be needs cases. A needs case being one where the assets do not exceed the party's needs. The flip side of that, of course, is a sharing case where the assets do exceed needs. PAG goes on to say, in needs-based cases, the timing and source of pension assets is not generally a relevant consideration, and the court can use all assets to ensure that parties' needs are met. In other words, that says ring fencing and apportionment arguments could well be unsuccessful. Now, this is an interesting one because I remember the original PAG report coming out, and inwardly I suspect that Blue Sky, as pension sharing report writers, and many of the other pension sharing report writing organisations that exist throughout the country, were perhaps whooping and celebrating the death of ring fencing and all of the hassles that we felt, possibly at times, the legal profession didn't fully understand when they put their requests in a letter of instruction. As it happened, PAG 1 comes out. What happened next? Well, the demand for ring fencing calcs in letters of instruction went through the roof. So, even if you just humour me for a second, let me please ask you to have some empathy for exactly the kind of pain that can exist when asking for ring fencing calculations. This one And rest assured, like most pension sharing report writers, we all have a vast history of war stories regarding ring fencing and apportionment, but this particular one is a relatively straightforward case, you might think. At the quotation stage, the solicitor rang in and said, "I'd like a pension sharing report, please." It's a nice, easy one. It involves a single personal pension, and we're just looking for an equality of income calculation. The letter of instruction arrives here at Blue Sky, and all of a sudden we've got the ring fencing calculation appearing within the instruction itself. And specifically, it's asking for a separation date of the 1st of October of that given year. I've got to tell you, it still stains me, this case, because that was some 8 or 9 years ago. The issues on this case, well, at face value, it might have looked good. Look, it's only one pension. It's the 1st of October. The problem is that when we got the information in from the pension provider, they informed us that that pension started on the 7th of October. So in obtaining information on that pension, we of course asked for premium history. The premium history told us that the pension had received 2 other transfers prior to the 7th of October. So off we go. We're going to get 2 more letters of authority from the individual so that we could then research those historic pensions. Researching historic pensions isn't necessarily always that straightforward because pension providers can be a bit tardy on providing information on money that's not with them anymore, or alternatively having to dig them out of archives. Anyway, information comes in, and we're then told that one of those 2 pensions itself had also received 2 transfers. Yet more authorities, yet more researching. So I'm sure you can pick up the frustration in my tone as to the implications of a ring fencing calc. We then fantastically produced the report to a very frustrated and slightly cross solicitor who's not understanding why we're getting frustrated by the fact that it's taking a long time as much as they are. But shortly after we wrote the report, we're then informed that the husband has actually taken a tax-free lump sum since we started our research. So yeah, it's they can be difficult ring fencing calculations. I also fully understand that when you have a client who has come in and has said he or she can't have this pension, we didn't even know each other then, your options are to protest, or your options are, no, I'll tell you what, we'll ask the pension sharing expert just to get on with this. We'll address that problem another day. And I've got every sympathy with that thought process. But just so that you understand a little bit more from the pension sharing report writer's perspective, ring fencing can be a problem. And I've not even bored you with how defined benefit schemes can be even worse than the complications that I've detailed there. Okay, part 5. So part 5 is titled Pensions, Deferred Income or Capital. I think this is a pretty short chapter, part 5. In, I guess, the simplest of ways, ignoring the first bullet point first of all, if you have a pension, the person's yet to take it, that, i.e. they've not retired, that is a deferred income. They can't access it, it's not cash because they're not old enough. Let's take the example, somebody is 40, they can't physically get hold of their pension pot till 55. Therefore, it isn't a chunk of capital that can go and be spent. If an individual is, let's say, 75 and their pension is in payment, that is also an income stream. So to get that clear, if the person is too early for taking their pension assets, then it's a deferred income. If the person is retired and the income's already in payment, then that's an income stream. The only reason it could ever be deemed to be capital pertains to the ability to take a tax-free lump sum from the pension pot. So to get that into context, that means that the person is almost certainly over 55, where they may be able to access potentially something in the region of 25% of the value of their pot. Now, I'll keep going on this point because, of course, if they've taken the tax-free lump sum and it's sat in their bank account, it is blatantly capital at that point. If, on the other hand, they haven't taken it, but they could do, then maybe that might be something that does form a part of a discussion with the solicitor as to whether or not they do release it and make it a capital sum. Maybe there might be something around paying off a mortgage or buying a house or something along those lines. From the pension sharing report writer's perspective, it's quite simple. If there's a pension that doesn't have a lump sum already taken from it, we will deem that to be a income stream within our reports. In short, if you haven't told us it's being used for something else, every expert out there will just treat the entirety of the pot as an income stream. All right, so just bear that one in mind. So here we go. We're on the big chapter. We're on the home leg now as we dive into part 6. Part 6 in today's session, it's this is the biggest chapter in the same way that in a fortnight's time you will find that part 7 offsetting is going to be the big meat of the session. Part 6 titled Dealing with Pensions Fairly on Divorce. I can tell you it means pension sharing. What have we got here? We've got a couple of points. So it says in italics, so direct extraction from the report, pensions are difficult to value and divide, and the assistance of a POD may be needed whether the case is contested or not. Okay. It is usual for reports to contain an equalization of income analysis. I touched on that point earlier on. It should always be your base question. Readers should review this entire part carefully before deciding how best to approach their current case. What I'm saying here is, if it's going to be, if you are time strapped, yes, do read all the summaries for each of the chapters and part 1, but you'd be well recommended to read part 6. It is an extremely relevant, as indeed part 7 will be. A POD should normally be instructed by both. They work for both parties on an equal basis. Yeah, I think in this case, you've got to read that statement in that it's saying a pension sharing report POD should normally be instructed on both. By both, because of course you might be instructing a POD to act as your shadow expert, of course, in which case they're there entirely for your side and to help you with maybe strategy, letters of instruction, etc., etc. Pension sharing may entail a significant reduction of the pension assets beyond the mere value of the pension funds being lost. Okay, that's an interesting statement, so I'm going to expand it slightly. On this slide, this one's pretty much straight off, hot off the press. This is a case that ran past our desk, I think, a month and a half ago. A well-known gas-related business in the country has a defined benefit scheme. In that particular case, we were told in the researching phase that the cash equivalent transfer value was 285k, and we were also told that the income was £37,000 per annum. Now that flagged up for us straight away. That CE looks woefully low, we thought. We challenged it on, I think, 3 occasions. They stuck to their guns on each one. From our perspective, if you'd have asked us what's a fair value for those benefits of 37k, we think the answer would have been something like £534,000. But what does this mean in the context of that last bullet point on the previous slide? Well, let's understand it a bit more. Because this is a private sector defined benefit scheme, the recipient spouse on a pension share, if it was applied to this scheme, does not become a member of the scheme, as you would find, for example, if the person was a nurse, a teacher, etc., etc. So they're going to be kicked out of that scheme with a chunk of money upon the pension sharing annex being completed to be putting into a pension in their own name. Because the scheme is undervalued, as we're looking at it there, it means that the wife, we assume it was the wife that had to leave the scheme, would need a lot more of the pension fund, which actually hurts both sides significantly. As pension sharing report writers, we're always looking for that type of scheme, because if we can, we'll choose not to share it. We'll look to go and share another scheme so that actually they both end up with as much income as we can possibly get for both sides. Flip side argument to that, let's imagine it was a FTSE 100 petroleum-based company. It's not unusual that their cash equivalent is massively higher than the, in inverted commas, fair value figure. And that's a good thing, because that means that lots more money could go from that scheme and it doesn't hurt both sides quite as much. In short, that went a bit technical, but if we look at that last slide again, pension sharing may entail a significant reduction of the pension assets beyond the mere value of the funds being lost. That's what it means. And of course, because I went a bit technical, there's every likelihood that that's another scenario where getting the third party help from an expert is invaluable. Okay, another example here. This one, it's an oldie, but goldie for Blue Sky. We must have rolled this slide out so many times on the last decade, but it still stresses a good point. In this case, let's just build the slide so you can see what we're trying to get. We can see that the wife, if we're just looking at the CEs, she is a member of a public sector pension scheme, a defined benefit scheme, and the cash equivalent is detailed as £300,000. The husband, he's exactly the same age and exactly the same health as his wife. He has a Scottish widow's pension that is worth £300,000 as well. If the only request in life was to achieve equality of capital, one might think, good, job done. They both have 300k. Let's not worry with a pension sharing report. However, when you dig deeper, because of the undervaluation of the wife's, in other words, the poor value of the wife's defined benefit scheme, we get to find and dig a bit deeper. We know with that pension scheme that the wife is going to get an automatic entitlement to a lump sum of 38,400 plus a nice annually indexing pension of 12,800. The husband, on the other hand, if we extract 38,400 of tax-free lump sum from his pension in our assumption so that we can match her lump sum, what's left only generates 6,800. So it's almost twice as much that the wife's got there. So, you know, this is a nice example. We've kept it in there because it stresses the point nicely. It highlights that equality of capital will have issues when you see a defined benefit scheme in the client's CV of pensions. Okay. Couple more slides, you'll be pleased to learn. The PAG report in part 6 does give some nice examples of occasions where probably you don't need the help of a POD. The slide that follows highlights some where you should seek the help of a POD. Now we have put in red a few bits here because maybe we're challenging some of these statements. In the first example case study, it says, okay, so you've got a couple, they're the similar age, similar health, and they're all defined contribution pension schemes. Yeah, I think that's a perfect case not to see a POD. You might want a local based resolution member or expert just to run their eye over to make sure you're not going mad. But in simple terms, husband has 300k, wife has 100k. That all adds up to 400,000. Therefore, the halfway point is 200,000. And therefore, we can see that we just need to give 1/3 of the husband's pension to the wife, and they both end up with 200k each. Perfect. Definitely a scenario that would not require anything particularly heavy in terms of a POD seeking to do a pension sharing report. The case study 2 it references is, look, younger parties, less than 40. You probably don't need a pension sharing report for that. We've just marked down in red a word of warning. If you see a uniformed public sector scheme in there, possibly I could fold a little bit there if it included any public sector scheme. But as a whole, if you're seeing them, I think that's a reason to get an expert's eye over it. Case study number 3, a modest value case, very, very low value. The pension values are low, other assets are low. The deep concern there has to be, how much is this actually going to cost the clients? And immediately followed by, what actual impact is this going to do? So I understand point 3. Point 4, non-uniform public sector where no offsetting involved. And we put a great big beware. In summary, the second one, the second point where we talked about uniformed public sector, and I've extended it by saying all public sector, I would say all public sector, particularly in the light of maybe things like McLeod lurking in the background, I would say, yeah, I'm still not convinced that you can let those ones run without some degree of extra reassurance for you. Next slide. The last of the slides on today's session that pertains to the PAG report. This particular slide, also extracted straight out of the PAG report, highlights when it will be necessary to get a report. And the examples here, it says uniformed public sector DB schemes. We've stuck a great big all in there because we just think the answer is all public sector DB schemes. Cases where combined defined benefit CEs exceed £100,000. Yep. The rationale for that, we saw earlier on my gas defined benefit scheme example and how such poor value it was. So sometimes those CEs just really aren't telling the truth. Public sector pensions when offsetting is being considered or a significant age gap. Age gap's actually the bit I'd focus on there. If you get any cases where there's a big age gap between husband and wife, that is that makes the maths a little bit complex and almost certainly warrants the help of an expert. Serious medical conditions, every single time that is a reason for a bit of expert guidance. I'm sure that our actuary PODs have got some opinions on this, but the financial planning PODs will fully comprehend the implications of what levels of severity might have of medical conditions might have on pension assets and other assets. Pensions where guarantees exist. We put some names of some really complex things there. They were covered off in Mike's session previously. As a general wet finger in the air attempt to try and understand when guarantees exist, I would possibly say to you that's something for a pension that was arranged before the year 2000. The last one, illiquid assets. I've touched on this one a few times. It doesn't have to just be commercial property held in a SIP or a SAS. You might even come across, I appreciate this is not for you to pass judgment on, but I don't know, let's keep topical. We had Woodford, a well-known investment manager and his funds. A lot of those funds are still illiquid as well. So it doesn't have to just be commercial property, but if in doubt, you should be asking. That was quite the whistle stop tour. I've looked up at the clock and wondered where on earth that time's gone to, but we are pretty much there. A few reference points, obviously the PAG report itself, that is, I mean, it's just well worth reading if you've not done, and actually if you've not read it since PAG 1 and today has inspired you to pick it up, definitely go get it. The Survival Guide to Pensions on Divorce is a slightly more watered down version, designed more for the member of the public. So I suppose you could read that instead. Blue Sky's website, well, we've actually got both of those documents on our website for ease, but we also have a few videos, things like these webinars that are available there as well. Okay, I think we've got 2 more slides. I don't know, do you want to pick up from here, Jeremy?
Yeah, thanks to Rob, and thanks to everybody attending today's webinar. We will keep the webinar open until 12 o'clock, just in case we get any further questions. If we don't get to those questions today, then certainly we'll come back to you on that. But just a few points before I close things down. So leave any feedback in the Q&A, or better still, do the Survey Monkey via the QR code that you can all see in front of you now. This really helps us understand where you feel that you might get further benefit from help and support from Blue Sky. Next up, of course, if you would like us to come and visit you in your office to do a team presentation, then please let us know. Alternatively, we could do Zoom or Teams, whatever works for you. This can be an informal coffee chat where we can be a bit free-spirited and relaxed and discuss cases that might have come across your desk recently, or we can do a more formal CPD training session. Look, we don't charge a fee for coming out to visit you, but we do hope for a good cup of coffee and perhaps some biscuits as well. And finally, I'd like to say thank you to my colleagues that assisted with our presentation today, in particular Neil, who helped put the slides together. So we'll just keep things open for the next few minutes just to see if there are any more questions. And just to reiterate as well that we'll be going through PAG 2 Part 2, which includes that monstrous chapter on offsetting on December the 4th. And hopefully you've all signed up for that. If not, get in contact, we can send you the link. So we'll just keep things open just to see if there's any questions come through. But thanks to everybody for attending today.
Okay, there is a question here from Alan. Just extrapolating, it says, generally, what's the situation for a male client with a significant defined contribution pension and a wife who is 28 years younger? Maybe I'll try my best to explain this in the mathematical terms. When we're trying to equalize pensions, we will factor in the pensions accrued from at today's date, and what we'll do is we'll roll those pensions on, allowing a degree of growth to apply based on the assumptions to the specific age that equality is needing to occur. If you have someone that is younger than someone who is older, then it means the younger person has longer for the growth to grow to reach the same value. So if someone genuinely was 28 years younger than their partner, and we had £100,000 of pension to share, for example, you will find it won't be a 50-50 share because the husband has less time to reach the retirement age, and therefore for investment growth to grow, whereas the wife in this instance that Alan is portraying in his Q&A question, she has a lot longer. So you'll find that it wouldn't be a 50-50 based on capital in my made up £100,000 pension pot. It will actually show more of a bias that the husband will have a bit more than the wife because the wife has more time for her pot to grow to reach her chosen retirement age. I do hope that answered the question. Well, I think in the circumstances then we've got to just after midday. Thank you for listening to me and Jeremy and the rest of the team doing their sterling work behind the scenes. I look forward to catching up with you all again in a fortnight's time where we'll grapple with offsetting. I've got some good thoughts for a couple of the slides on that one. Anyway, speak soon.